Thank you so much, Wes. I'd like to introduce each of our authors and invite them to do a short reading so we can get to know them and a little bit about their works. And then we will get started with some questions and some chat. So Lisa, we're going to introduce you first. So Lisa Alward was born and grew up in Halifax and completed an English degree at the University of Toronto and an MA at Queen Mary College in London, England. In the 80s, she worked in book publishing in Toronto, including the Literary Press Group, before moving with her family to Vancouver and ultimately to Fredericton. And that's where you are now, right? Her debut collection, Cocktail, was released by Biblioasis in September 2023. So Lisa, would you like to start your reading?
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction, Sarah. And I'm going to read from the title story of my collection, which is called Cocktail. And this is one of the first stories I wrote and was inspired by my own memories of, but also stories that my mother later told me about cocktail parties in the 1960s in Halifax, where I grew up. And what has always kind of fascinated me about those parties, especially looking back, is how kind of formal and almost old-fashioned they seemed on the surface, in that, you know, everybody got very dressed up, the men all wore suits, the women made all these beautiful fancy cocktail tidbits from Julia Child, served them on silver plates and so on. But how at the same time, how wild these parties became as the evening progressed. And also as the years progress, and particularly as the 60s gave way to the much more permissive 1970s. And so in a way, this story is really about those two decades, and in particular, what it was like to be a child, sort of churning about in the undertone or the undertow of all those cultural changes. So here is just a little excerpt from Cocktail. In a cubbyhole of my father's desk once, I found the tally of expenses for the very first cocktail party they held in the house that I grew up in. These were, in descending order, neatly reflecting their priorities: liquor, $136, food, $25, bartender, $8, maid, $5. Next to the amount for bartender, my father had added in block letters, Tony. For $8, this Tony, whom I remember standing at attention in a white jacket beside our blue Formica kitchen table, not only mixed and served the drinks, but also did the purchasing based on his intimate acquaintance with my parents' cocktail set. These drinks had exotic and often slightly suggestive names like Mai Tai, Sidecar, or Hanky Panky, and they involved special ingredients and tools. In the door of our refrigerator, there were always jars of olives and pickled onions and red and green maraschino cherries. Extra ashtrays were stored in a cupboard above the sink, while another, higher cupboard held the glasses: marble-bottomed old-fashioned glasses, tall highball, and even taller Collins glasses, delicate martini glasses with bowls splayed wide like spent tulips. A drawer in our telephone nook hid a collection of miniature plastic swords that my brother and I were not allowed to play with, as well as toothpicks with sparkly tassels and packs of invitations. Cocktails, these small rectangular cards showed in eager, crushed together letters, the dot over the I a stuffed green olive or luscious red-stemmed cherry that I longed to pop into my mouth. Sometimes my mother would let David and me watch as the first of her guests took off their coats, revealing dark suits with narrow lapels and dazzling shift-style dresses in emerald and tangerine. We always had to be sitting on the stairs, though, bathed and changed for bed, our teeth brushed, ready to turn and go the instant she gave the wave. Every time the door opened, I would tug my nightdress around my ankles and lean excitedly into my brother, who might be wrapping a rolled-up comic book against his knee or clicking a pair of swords he'd snatched from the kitchen when Tony wasn't looking. But we never spoke to my parents' friends, even the ones we recognized as the mothers and fathers of our own friends, and my mother didn't introduce us. The cocktail party world lay at a remove, The grown-ups put on their party clothes and seemed to forget us. Thank you.
Thank you. That really sets a stage. Our next reader is G.A. Grisenthwaite. Gord Grisenthwaite is an Aklumklamuk member of the Lytton First Nation. His stories and poems have appeared in the Antigonish Review, Our Stories Literary Journal, and Prism International. His work has earned a number of prizes, including the 2014 John Kenneth Galbraith Literary Award, and he lives in Kingsville, Ontario. Right now, though, he's in Dawson City on a writing scholarship at the Pierre Burton House. His most recent work is Tales for Late Night Bonfires, published by Freehand Books, and there it is. Over to you, Gord, for a reading.
Oh, thank you for that, Sarah. Yes, I'm in beautiful Dawson City, and I'm just going to jump into a story called Catching Farts. The action's already happening. Chucky slurping his tea, the dull clank of he and Sis's mugs hitting the table now and then. A good silence. Until you remember 4-year-old Yellow wanders his uncle's house unattended and unrestrained. Yellow somehow has scaled Grand's 120-year-old wooden rocker, precariously balanced atop its back and reaching for the big glass bowl full of shotgun shells. His 4-year-old brain knows the boom they make. He likes the boom. He likes the smell of the smoke guns fart after they boom. Why don't my farts make pretty blue smoke? Maybe I just need to munch one of them shotgun candies. The explosion of glass, the pop of pellets piercing pop cans and plastic jugs makes him squeal and clap his hands and dance a happy kind of pee-pee dance. He likes that Uncle Chucky will give him his own 12 gauge when he turns 12, and loves that his mom will let him. Those two 12s make him laugh. 12 gauge 12. Words taste like gun smoke. I'll hip shoot bad guys like that famous TV Indian Chuck Connors. Blam blam. I'll hip shoot renegade engines like that famous TV Indian, that rifleman. Blam blam. Tricky engines. Engines? And renegades look a lot like Indians, but don't want to shoot Indians. I bet I know what you're thinking. Believe me, everyone tries telling him the rifleman's a white guy called Chuck Connors. Everyone. Nuh-uh, says Yellow. No Shemak could play Geronimo like that rifleman. You know, his great-grandfather Beltran, who loves them old cowboy movies, went to his grave sorry he let the boy watch them with him. Old Beltran, near the end, said he kept watching him, hoping one day the Indians would win. Here's the catch. Yellow's 4-year-old mind doesn't fathom 12, except that 12 is not tomorrow, and probably not next week either. But them shotgun shells way up high on the big people only shelf, and them shells smell like right now. Right now. This minute. You hear that? Sis asks. What? Another mouse in the cornflakes? Another family of raccoons in the attic? An elk or whitetail chewing a new bark off the cherry tree? Nope. And now Chucky hears it too. He hears the quiet. Just as Sis says, it's too quiet. Their mugs slam the table as one. As one, they race to the other room. As one, their mouths freeze in an unyelled, no! I'll stop there.
Okay. Oh my goodness. No, we need to find out next. And so I'm thrilled that Matt has been able to join us. So welcome, Matt. And I'm going to read your bio and invite you to do a reading. All right. So you're just in time.
Thank you.
So Matthew Del Papa, born with spinal muscular atrophy, Matthew Del Papa has been in a wheelchair since the early 1980s. a graduate of Laurentian University in Humanities, past president of the Sudbury Writers Guild, and currently on the board of directors for Wordstock Sudbury Literary Festival. Hello to our sister festival. Writing steadily since 2005, his work has been published in newspapers and magazines, as well as anthologies. He lives in Capriol, Ontario, and published his first collection of essays, Jerry Lewis Told Me I Was Going to Die, in May 2023. Welcome, Matt. I'm going to invite you to give your reading now.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the technical difficulties on my end there. A couple of things went wrong, but we got it figured out. So I'm going to read a short essay, part of an essay, because most of mine are long. So this one is called Top 10 Things I Wish Someone Had Told Me Prior to Childhood Surgery. And I'm going to read number 6, which is called That You Can Refuse Treatment for Any Reason. So here goes. At the time of my operation, spine straightening surgery was still new. The first successful treatment had occurred far too recently for anyone with sense to even consider undertaking the still technically experimental procedure. I didn't have an option. My life didn't quite hang in a balance. I could have put it off for months, or possibly even years. The worsening spinal scoliosis would need medical attention sooner or later, but being young and naive, I chose sooner. It was a point of pride for me that my surgeon had pioneered the operation, and as far as I knew, I was the 5th or 6th person in the world to have it done. 12 hours under anesthesia, followed by weeks of bedridden recovery, or so everyone involved warned me. The surgeon, the anesthesiologist, the nurses, my parents, but it didn't stop there. No, everyone added 2 ominous words. Painful weeks. That last was stressed, repeatedly, until I grew sick of hearing it, which left me confused. Following the operation, I didn't suffer from any noticeable pain, not on first waking, and not in the days that followed. Sure, there was some soreness. You can't be split open from top to bottom, get steel rods attached to your backbone, then have your spinal column stretched several inches before being stitched back up again, and not expect a bit of discomfort, but nothing near the level of agony I'd been promised. In fact, I found the injection of my so-called medicine much more bothersome. Why they insisted on jamming that obscenely large needle into my leg, I'll never know. It hurt every time, until finally I begged them to stop. No one believed me when I said my back felt fine. Across the hall, the young woman who had the same surgery as me the day before complained nonstop. She lived in agony, desperate for the brief release brought on by the carefully timed pain medications. Meanwhile, I wanted the injections to stop. There's a frustration known almost exclusively to 2 groups, children and the chronically ill. It involves having others think they know what's best for you better than you do. Everyone claimed to be working in my best interest while I was recovering from major surgery, but it was one old nurse who did me the most meaningful service. She told me I could just say no. I promptly did just that. It became my new favorite word, like I was some sort of contrary toddler with a limited vocabulary. I declined every painkiller on offer, and though that didn't go over well with the medical establishment, my discomfort never increased. What's more, my appetite started to return, and I couldn't get home fast enough after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah. Thank you all for your readings. So our audience has gathered by now that all of your works are with Lisa and Gord. You both chose the short story format. And Matt, can I call you Matt, or would you prefer Matthew?
Either is fine with me. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Been called worse.
All right. Okay, and Matt, instead of a full-length memoir, you chose a series of personal humorous essays. May I ask you all, what are your thoughts on why these short forms work so well for you? And it is a format that you enjoy reading as well. Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
Well, truthfully, I probably read as many collections of short stories in a year as I do novels. I'm very drawn to the short story form, and I think I always have been, maybe perhaps when I was younger without fully realizing it. I know that, for example, my first love as a child in reading were fairy tales. And one of the things that I think I really admire about the short story is the compression of the form. And many short stories are, in fact, very much like fairy tales in that they can express the whole of a person's life in a very few pages. But I also love the compression of the form in other ways. I love the fact that many short stories are just about a few minutes or a day or or a couple of days. And yet we can extract meaning from this very, very short, I say, compressed period of time. So yeah, I'm very drawn to the short story for that reason, because I enjoy them as a reader. But I also think that there is some freedom in the short story. Now, I've never written a novel, so I can't really say this for sure, but I feel that short stories do offer some more freedom in terms of exploration, because with a short story, there's perhaps less of a need to plan carefully in advance, where you might be going and, where you're going to end up and so on. Partly because if it doesn't work out, you can just shelve it if, you've only spent a little bit of time on it. But also, I just think the form has fewer expectations from readers. I think with the novel, we often have expectations of a certain type of closure and certain types of things we want from a novel. Whereas the short story, it's a little more fluid. There's a little more openness to different forms. So I guess those would be a few thoughts I have, but certainly I'm very wedded to the short story.
And Matt, what about essays with you?
Well, I wanted to write novels, but I lacked the stamina and the focus to actually finish one. I sort of fell into essays. A friend of mine started a website and they needed some content, local history kind of website. And so I started writing pieces for him. And then another friend of mine started a local newspaper and they wanted content. So I started writing articles for him. And then another local paper needed something. So they asked me and I started writing articles for them. And then I tried to write short stories. Jerry Lewis Told Me I Was Going to Die was originally a short story that I could never make work. I tried and tried. I just don't seem to have the knack to make that particular format function the way I want it to. So finally, I just gave up on short stories and said, well, let's try writing this as an article. And it seemed to work better. I don't know if it's because I'm a little more enclosed in what I can do and less room to kind of wander, which I tend to do a lot of. But it ended up working out. People have complimented me on my essays before, mostly for the humor. So I tried to lean into that, and it seemed to work out okay. Like I said, the first place I submitted bought the book, which was extremely exciting for me. And working with their publishing team and whatnot, we turned out something that I'm reasonably proud of. So
it's great. Thank you. And Gord, you have some characters who appear and reappear throughout your stories, and you've even got a big old novella in there. But what was it about that shorter form that drew you, or draws you as well?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since Lisa started speaking. I don't know. I've written both novel and short stories. One of the big differences is, for me, the novel is a lot more fun, and it's a lot less. It's a lot more work, but it's a lot less constrained. I feel I have more room to play with scenes and characters. In a short story, I try to make them quick and pointed. So everything, it's like Poe's one effect. Everything leads to the ending. And it's fun. I enjoy writing short stories, but they're not in and out. I mean, the last story in Tales took 3 years to write. Mind you, I've been working on this novel I'm working on now. I've been working on it off and on for about 10 years. So it's just fun. Ultimately, yeah, it's just fun.
There's a lot to be said for fun.
Mm.
Yeah. And we're reflecting on the theme of this panel, which is stories that connect us. And we can all connect to so many aspects of each of your works. Gord, those of us who want to connect to family and culture. Matt, those of us who live with a disability, and those of us who love them, or even those of us who live in a small town, because you got that front and center. And Lisa, those of us who have experienced doubt and heartbreak, who hasn't, and joy in our relationships, all of these are beautifully illuminated in your books. So, and you've done such a great job of making these connections. So how do you each see these types of connections as part of your writing goals? I'm going to start with you, maybe Matthew.
Sure,
How do you
thank
want to relate to your audience through your making connections?
Yes, that's a great question, Sarah. Thank you. Connections, I think personal connections to the relatability between the disabled and the non-disabled. There's a otherness factor that people feel if you have a visible disability. People treat you different. Sometimes worse, most of the time better. It can be nice. People can be, kind and comforting and whatnot, but there is always this separateness that because I think people generally want to be helpful, friendly, but they don't always know how to act around people who are different. I can remember decades ago now, when I was in university, writing an essay about the Racist Anonymous. My thesis was basically that racism is a disease like alcoholism, and you can treat it with the same step-by-step method that the Alcoholics Anonymous use. And I had a lot of fun playing with that. And the point of that was that people don't know what they don't know, and that makes them scared. People aren't really hateful or bigoted or prejudiced in my experience. Maybe other people have different experiences, but that ignorance, the fear of showing it, the fear of offending, makes people look inward more than they normally would. So my book was an attempt to just kind of tell things as I see them, and make that human to human connection through words on the page, that no matter how different we may look or how different our lives may be, inside we're all human, and we all want the same kind of things, and that just reaching across that little gap, it takes effort, and there's risk involved. You may insult somebody, you may offend somebody, you may look stupid. I've resigned myself. I think most writers do to what was it Hemingway said? Writing is easy, just bleed on the page or something. That's what we do, and other people need to realize that there's nothing wrong with making mistakes in the purpose of service of something better. And that's what I was trying to reach across with my book, was to encourage other people to not just sympathize or feel sorry for the disabled, but to actually connect with them.
And Lisa, your stories connect with the vulnerable, or people who have made to feel vulnerable because of circumstances in their lives. How do you want your stories to connect with people?
Well, it's probably not something that I'm actively thinking about as I write. How am I going to, connect with readers? And in fact, I'm often very unclear in my own mind who my readers are, who my ideal readers are. But I completely agree with Matt. And the way I see it is that we look to fiction for sort of two separate but kind of intertwining experiences. We do want to learn about others, and I think stories and fiction are one of the ways in which we do discover information and understanding of other people. But I think at the same time, we also want our own selves to be somewhat reflected back to us. And I think the best stories do a little bit of both. And in the process, they really help to expand our sense of what it means to be human. when I think about this idea of the reflecting back, sometimes it seems like maybe we just want to just look in a mirror, but I think it's deeper than that. I think often the way in which we lead our lives, we don't actually spend a lot of time really examining ourselves, and sometimes fiction helps us do that by taking us a little deeper than we are inclined to go in our normal lives, when we're really just trying to get from point A to point B, and not thinking that deeply about things. And I think that's why, many people will have a kind of an aha moment when they're reading a piece of fiction, where they suddenly feel seen and also they see themselves. So I think that's what I think of in terms of connection. But as I say, I don't really actively, it's not something I'm actively thinking about as I write. I'm just writing because I'm writing, and then it's something that I might think about later.
Thank you. And Gord, when we're reading your stories, we're almost getting like a fly on the wall kind of view, or even a mosquito around the bonfire kind of view of what your characters are saying. So what would you like us to know about, or to make connections with your stories?
I haven't thought that far ahead. When I think about connections, all I think about is the way the characters work with each other and against each other. I don't presume anything more than that. Ideally, I want you to love the characters and therefore the stories. And after that, anything that happens is totally up to you, for you, by you. And if it comes out in a good way, yay. If it doesn't, oh well. But I really do not think past the characters in the story.
Cool. Sarah, I wonder if I could add. I was thinking, and just listening to everybody talking about this issue, I've been thinking recently about this whole sociological, I think it is, theory of the third space. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where you have, ideally we have three spaces in life. We have our workspace, we have our domestic space, and then we have this third space where we're hopefully get a chance to sort of engage with and to converse with strangers. That would be like, the grocery store, or it might be a coffee shop or a bar,
Library.
Yeah, and just a public space. And one thing that's really occurred to me is to the degree to which that third space has been eroded, particularly since the pandemic, and also even the workspace, as many people now are opting for, if they can, opting for remote work, and how that has made us more and more reliant on our domestic spaces. And I think, the danger in that is, as I think Matt talked a bit about, the sort of moving inward. And also, I guess what I would say is, as a kind of vote in confidence for fiction, is that, traditionally, and I think even more importantly right now, stories, novels, short story collections, essay collections, they are a way in which we can kind of retrieve a little bit of that third space by reading about other people's lives and relating to those lives. And also, I think, stories, we talk about stories constantly nowadays. It's become a term that's been kind of co-opted by, corporations, and, everybody's got a story, right? But what's wonderful about fiction is that it's not passive. We actually have to be intellectually, imaginatively engaged with it. So
that's a wonderful point. And it leads me beautifully to another discussion I wanted to have with you, is how your books are grounded in a certain setting that I feel means a lot to all of you. Matt, it's your home in Northern Ontario with a side trip to Disney World. Lisa, more of the setting of time as well with you, as your stories we heard range in location and time. And then Gord, in Indigenous communities, also small towns. What is it about these places and times that draw you to write about them? Gord, can we start with you this time, and then Lisa, and then Matt?
Okay, yeah. Just about every story I've written takes place in an imaginary version of my hometown Lytton, and that part of the country, the plateau in south central BC. It's kind of a magical place, and I don't mean that in a woo-woo sort of way, but the reality is good stuff happened there and a lot of bad stuff happened there, and I do have trouble going home. Even harder now that it's burned down, but but of all the places I lived, it's the one that's stuck with me the most, or it's the deepest feelings, good, bad, otherwise, emerge from there. And it's not as if, or what is it? It's a good place to just jump from. It's some of the stories are kind of magical. Some of them are pretty gritty. But it evokes the reality of my reality, or my vision, or my memories of the place. So it's real, but it's not real. It's a comfortable place. Like, it's a nice buffer between biography and history. So out of those kinds of facts, there's this other set of facts that emerge, and it's just beautiful, and the people are wonderful.
They are. If they're anything like the people in your stories, you want to have dinner with them all the time. So it's great. Yeah.
Almost all the time.
Almost all the time. And Lisa, how about you? What drew you to your settings, your time and locations?
Well, it's interesting what Gord was saying about Lytton, because I think, often place is intertwined with time. Like when we think about place, we often think about place in a specific time. It's not, it's not always like the place as it is today, in this particular moment. But for me, I was interested that you commented that my stories are set often in time as opposed to is not as firmly in place. And I think that's quite true. In fact, I have found that I'm being a little hesitant to set stories very clearly in Fredericton, where I live. I almost never do it. I have stories that, I'm sure my friends who live in Fredericton can sort of, yeah, that seems very Fredericton-like, but I rarely actually make that clear that it's set in Fredericton. And sometimes I don't want it to seem as Fredericton. I kind of want it to be seen as any sort of smallish city somewhere in Eastern Canada is kind of usually what I think about it. But there are some stories that I have very clearly set in a particular place, and these are always the stories that are set in the past. So I have, for example, 3 stories that are set in Halifax, where I grew up, and those are stories where there are real obvious clues. And in fact, Halifax even gets mentioned, but there are, street names and businesses that people will recognize. And I also have a story that's set in St. John, New Brunswick, set on 2 specific days, both in the past, one in 1960 and one in 1977. So I guess for me, time and place are very intertwined. And for some reason, I feel more comfortable being open about the place that the story is set in, if it is set in the past. I haven't got a completely a full understanding of why I feel this way, but it tends to be the way it works in my stories.
That's great. Yeah. And Matt, what is it about, I don't even know if I pronounced your hometown correctly in the bio. What it is about there that really draws you?
Don't worry, Sarah. Everybody gets it wrong. It is pronounced Caprel, but most people get it wrong, so it's not a big deal.
Okay.
I gotta second what Gord said about his hometown. Sounds, even though I think Lytton is a lot bigger than my hometown of Caprel, the small towns, the places where we come from, they make us what we are. And as Lisa said, the time and the place are intertwined. So a lot of my book is it's as you mentioned, Sarah, other than the one story in Disney World, they're all set in Cape Breton, more or less, at a certain time, which was, you know, late 70s, early to mid 80s, when I was growing up, when Cape Breton was, it was Norman Rockwell-esque. You know, it was small town Canada at the best time to, well, arguably the best time. You know, we had access to the city, but we were far enough away to be separate. You know, it was in many ways it was a launching pad for me, but it was also an anchor. You know, something reliable. I could always, you know, count on Cape Breton to be Cape Breton, the people I knew to be the people I knew. And you know, you can say you can never go home again, but I've never left, so it's still my home, and it'll remain my home forever. And so place and time were vital to my collection of essays, and to my current work in progress. The same kind of thing is, you know, it's I think Gord said he was doing an idealized version of his hometown. That's my next book is hopefully going to be an idealized version of Cape Breton at a specific time in its history, seen through the eyes of another young, you know, kid growing up in town, just like I did in the 80s. This one will be a kid growing up in the 60s. So I don't think we can get away from it. A lot of people fight against their hometowns. A lot of people resent them. I can remember writing a story, and the opening line was something along the lines of watching the hometown fade in the rearview mirror was the greatest thing he'd ever seen, you know, because he just had to get out that character. And I know friends and family who have done that. They left when they could, went off to college or a job, and, you know, they've never come back, or they never want to come back. Whereas I'm the opposite. Every time I leave this town, even for a day or two, you know, for a day trip, I'm happy to come home. It's my happy place. It's my comfort zone. So.
Well, thank you for introducing us all to that. It's been really interesting to see that and compare to, you know, the small towns that we've all encountered, and certainly Lisa, with your settings, oh my goodness, I was thinking of my parents' Rotary dinners and cocktail parties, you know, growing up in Scotland. It's the same thing. So I have a ton of things I'd like to ask you, and I've got one question I'm going to just ask you, and then I'm going to check with Wes while we're doing this next question to see if any members of the audience would like to ask a question as well. If not, that's fine. We'll keep going and maybe have another reading. But so yeah, so if anybody listening is able to send a question to our host in the chat, please go ahead. And we'll try and get that fed to our authors. So I want to talk a little bit about nitty-gritty of publishing a book in honor of the sponsor of this panel, Palimpsest, and Canadian Heritage and Ontario Arts Council, who've also sponsored this. So normally interviewers ask you authors about your writing practice, you know, but in this case, even though this may be the first book of this type or second books, you've all been writing for a long time, right? What was it like making the transition to working with an editor once you were picked up with publishers for these particular books? How did that connection work for each of you? Let's start with Matt, and then Gord and Lisa.
Okay, thank you. I was excited to land a publisher, a legit publisher. I had self-published a number of small, kind of hyper-local titles previous to this. I'd been doing that since 2009. Basically a book a year, every other year, kind of depending on how I felt. So it was a huge ego boost to have somebody put their money where my mouth was, as it is, you know, and having professionals do the work that I had been kind of struggling to do on my own. I learned a lot. Didn't realize how much money was involved in mainstream publishing. You know, I nickeled and dimed it through my own books, you know, begging friends and family to you know, if anybody had a background in art, you know, I'll do the cover. If they had a background in education or whatever, you're the proofreader, you know, and you know, I made it work. But when you have people who actually know what they're doing with experience in the business, it moves so much more smoothly. It takes a lot longer because professionalism isn't the same as, somebody just kind of dashing it off after work. I mean, these people take a lot of pride in what they do, and they do the best job that they can, which really made my book shine. I got to give them a lot of credit. The people at Latitude 46 Publishing who did my book, and my editor Mitchell, who took me by the hand and really kind of showed me the importance of being clear. Far too often I was more worried about the laugh or that zinger, getting the tone right, and lots of the times he's like, I don't understand what you're trying to say here. It's not clear. This doesn't come across the way you think it does. It's not clear. And with his voice ringing in my ear when I'm rereading and editing and revising, I managed to excise a lot of what my one friend loves to call fluff, which my books tend to have a lot of, because I kind of meander between topics, and so yeah, that professionalism was the key. And the other thing was being a small publisher in basically the neighboring city where I grew up. Sudbury is 35-40 minute drive from Capril. I knew the publisher beforehand from my business with the Writers Guild, and it's just, writing's a small community, as I'm sure you all know. So you run into the same people at different events over and over, and you gradually start to form friendships with them. And yeah, so that was the impressive part was working with people who do this for a living and know the ins and outs and the tricks of the trade. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to working with either them again or somebody else down the line. So,
very good points, Gord.
Well, I had the same editor for Tales as I did for Homeworlds. Amy connected me with Jamie, who I had met at Margaret Atwood's masterclass on Pelee Island back in 2017 or so. So we had that connection already. We worked really well together on Homeworlds, and we had almost as good a relationship in Tales. We had some cultural differences and some differences in opinion as to what would work and what wouldn't. And the last story, Grumps versus the Real Santa, was a little bit tough for him, and we got through it, and I think it worked out okay. As to publishing, I sent Tales out to 4 publishers, 2 offered contracts, and 2 wanted to read it. So I think I went 4 for 4 on Tales, which totally blows my mind. And I ended up going with Freehand because I had met the managing editor, Kelsey, at Word on the Lake in Salmon Arm, an annual BookFest. And she had blue penciled a scene from Homeworlds and said, when it's finished, send it to us. And so when it was finished, I sent it to them. I said, this one isn't quite for us, but next time, send us your next one. And so I did. And ultimately, that's why I went with them. And they're wonderful. Just absolutely beautiful people. It's very Trumpian, that answer. I want to retract that. And that's beautiful, because that was down to the gestures. And that's just from doom scrolling, I think. I apologize for that. That's
Gord, isn't it a sad day when we can't say beautiful people? So many bits of language that we feel we can't say now because of that Trumpian.
Yeah. And bridges ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you had the same editor with 2 different publishers. Excuse me. Lisa, how about you?
Well, I mean, my book, I'm going to show it again. It's published by Biblioasis, and my experience is, because it's short stories, my initial goal was to publish them in literary magazines, and so that was what I was doing. I wasn't actually thinking about a book initially at all. I'm a bit of a late bloomer. I started writing in my 50s, so I was very happy just to get them published. But one thing that I did that I think, in retrospect, was a really good thing is I sent a lot of my stories to contests. Whenever I had a story that was ready and there was a contest, I would send it. And I was fortunate to win two contests in 2 years in a row. So the title story won the Fiddlehead contest, and then the second story in the book, Old Growth, won the Peter Hinchcliffe with the New Quarterly. And that put me on the radar of my editor. That's how he found out about me. This was a long time ago, almost 10 years ago. It's John Metcalf at Biblioasis, and he had read, well, he read Cocktail when it won the Fiddlehead, then he read the second story, and so he got in touch with you quite early on. But at that stage, I had really just begun. I wasn't ready for a book. But the wonderful thing was that he kept in touch. So, every once in a while I would hear from him. And then about 3 summers ago, we were talking about something else on the phone. My editor doesn't use email, so it's always the phone or a letter. And he basically said, neither of us are getting any younger, he said to me, which I thought was quite humorous, because it's very true in my case, but doubly true in his case because he's 80. And so he suggested I send him my manuscript, and I did. And then there was a bit of a lapse, like a lull, like nothing happened for about 1.5 years. And then once it almost feels like it's a little, caboose or like a compartment on a train that once it gets going, it really gets going. So because it was December of last year, I heard from the production manager, and there were marketing questionnaires. And then before I knew it, it was going into editing and cover design and marketing and so on. I've been extremely happy with my publisher. I find, and a very, very professional. Also, I think one of the things that's an advantage with, what we call a small press, which is kind of code for Canadian owned, because all the Canadian owned presses tend to be small, is that they are probably, I suspect, a little more collaborative than, say, the multinationals. For example, my cover, which I love, was one of 5 different designs that their designer did, and I was absolutely encouraged and allowed to sort of weigh in on which one I liked the best. And I like this one the best, so that's on the cover. So yeah, I would say I've had a very positive experience so far.
Awesome. Yeah, very different experiences for the 3 of you. So I just wanted to do a quick round robin. Our audience is a bit shy with questions, and that's fine. So I want to do a quick round robin with the titles of your books, and then invite you all to do another reading. So I'm just going to remind everybody, Matthew with Jerry Lewis told me I was going to die. I'm going to ask you to give a quick overview for those of us who, heavens above, don't know the connection to Jerry Lewis or even who he was. So do you want to just give us a little background about that?
Sure. Yeah, that's as I said earlier, it was originally supposed to be a short story because it was vaguely humorous anecdote about what happened to me. In that, growing up in the 80s, I watched the Jerry Lewis Muscular Dystrophy Telethon on Labor Day weekend pretty much religiously. In my family, we had it on all weekend because they raised money for muscular dystrophy. And one episode, Jerry Lewis was on pretty much nonstop for the entire weekend. It was superhuman, the effort he put into it. He happened to mention in passing that most people with muscular dystrophy at the time don't live past their 16th birthday. And I was maybe 8 or 9 when I heard that. And for some reason in my mind, that conflated with the fact that when I turned 16 and I blew up my candles, I would die. Like that moment, as soon as the candles were blown out, I was going to die. And so for the next few years, being a 8, 9, 10-year-old, all my friends were, I can't wait to be 16, get my license. I can't wait to be 16, get a job. I'm like, I can't wait to be 16. I'm going to die. That's not good. And then I finally realized when I was about 12 or 13, after having basically spent every birthday wish on, please don't let me die when I turn 16, realizing that I don't actually have muscular dystrophy. What I had was spinal muscular atrophy, which for convenience sake is categorized as a type of muscular dystrophy. And so technically Jerry Lewis didn't tell me I was going to die, but he implied it, and being naive and, trusting authority figures, especially TV celebrities, I believed them. And that kind of shaped my life for about 5 or 6 years before I realized my ridiculous error. But I thought it was a kind of a funny story, and that's what I ended up. The original story was what I started, and I tried it, like I said, multiple times, and I couldn't make it work. And when I changed to an essay, it kind of fell together, and I think it turned out okay. So, and it was a catchy title. My publisher loved the title, even if I have to explain who Jerry Lewis is to anybody who's under 40, which is a lot of people. So,
Lisa, did you just pick a story that sold you, or is it like your book is a wonderful cocktail of stories?
I just don't think there was ever any question that it was going to be called anything but cocktail. Certainly my editor, he wanted to call it cocktails at some point, but we decided not to do that. But no, it just seemed like the absolute right title for the book. Do you want my elevator pitch on what the book is about? I have one. So basically it's 12 stories. They're set in the 1960s and 70s, the 80s and 90s, and the various decades since. And the one sort of theme that I've been able to sort of pull out for all of the stories, or most of the stories, is that they tend to deal with the kind of strange pull over time of a chance encounter. And so the very first one that I read from at the beginning, the narrator's lying in bed during one of these cocktail parties when one of her parents' drunken guests knocks on the door, and they have an encounter. And in the other story, which if we have a chance, I'll read a little bit from in a moment, which is called Bear Country. It's a middle-aged man who's in the middle of divorce, and he encounters this kind of cute woman on a country road, and has a little encounter that kind of reveals some of his fears. So that's what I would say.
And Gord, tales for late night bonfires.
Tales for Late Night Bonfires. The title was obvious when this started off as my thesis project. And once my advisor, Dr. Susan Holbrook, and I figured out the stories I was going to write, it was from that moment on, it was Tales for Late Night Bonfires. The kind of stories that you might hear around the fire, and a couple of the stories are sort of they are directly based on hunting stories I heard people telling around the fire. So the title was the title, and the stories just all fell into place. Same with Home Waltz. I knew Home Waltz was the name of the novel before it was a novel. And when, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, it's a great title.
I don't know if Gord feels the same way, but I sometimes find that when the title occurs to you, during the writing, you just know. And sometimes you don't know and you end up changing titles, but when you actually know the title, it just becomes very much part of the process, and it's almost like a goal. You're like now writing for the title in a way. It really sort of shapes everything.
All right, so we're getting the official hook. I apologize. I'm going to encourage everybody to get a hold of your books and read them. So thank you all for your wonderful responses and your wonderful readings. Wes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone again. Thank you, Sarah, for your excellent moderation at today's program. We want to thank all of you for joining us. Books are available at the in-person festival through Biblioasis, as well as online through the publishers or through an independent bookseller near you. I put the links to their publishers' websites to buy the books in the chat. And if you are in Windsor, Essex, and able to attend the in-person events, we hope to see you at some other sessions happening this evening at BookFest Festival de Livre Windsor 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye now.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone.